The crowd had gathered, buzzing with excitement, as they waited for the highly anticipated event to begin. Families, students, and curious onlookers filled the venue, eager to witness a conversation that could shape the future. Among them, a small girl stood quietly, clutching the edge of her mother's coat. Unlike the others who chattered with excitement, her eyes held a depth beyond her years, a quiet seriousness that set her apart. She watched as the speaker took the stage, her gaze unblinking, absorbing every word. The energy in the room was palpable, filled with admiration and curiosity. Questions were being asked, some technical, some ambitious, others playful. But the little girl remained silent, standing close to her mother, her small fingers twisting the fabric of her sleeve. As the discussion continued, she took a step forward, then hesitated. Her mother glanced down at her, sensing the unspoken question forming in her mind. She knelt beside her, whispering words of encouragement. The girl swallowed hard, gathering courage she wasn't sure she had. The moderator opened the floor for more questions, scanning the audience for eager hands. The little girl hesitated again, then slowly, almost reluctantly, raised her hand. It wasn't a bold, confident gesture like the others. It was small, uncertain, yet unmistakably full of quiet determination. At first, it seemed no one had noticed. The room was filled with raised hands, people eager to speak. She felt a moment of doubt, her hand faltering. But then, as if drawn by an invisible force, the speaker's gaze landed on her. The chatter in the room softened, attention shifting to the tiny figure standing amid a sea of grown-ups. The moderator gestured toward her, signaling that she could speak. A hush fell over the crowd. The girl took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this was her moment, but the words felt heavy in her throat, too important to rush. She shuffled her feet, glancing down at the floor for a brief second before lifting her eyes again. There was something in them, something that made even the most distracted members of the audience sit up and take notice. This wasn't just a child asking a simple question. This was something else entirely. Her mother gave her a reassuring nod, but the girl barely noticed. Her world had narrowed to this one moment, to the single opportunity to voice the words that had weighed on her for so long. She parted her lips, willing her voice to come out steady, even as her fingers tightened around the fabric of her sleeve. Her voice, when it finally emerged, was soft but carried an undeniable weight. The words were not rehearsed, not polished like the others. They were raw, filled with the innocence of childhood, yet laced with an emotion far too deep for her age. The crowd, which had moments ago been alive with energy, grew eerily silent, waiting for what would come next. The moment her voice broke the silence, the air in the room seemed to change. It was small, fragile, yet carried a weight that made even the most distracted listener pause. She spoke slowly, as if choosing her words with the care of someone who knew that once they were released, there was no taking them back. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the hem of her dress, her fingers twisting the fabric. She was young, too young to be standing in front of so many people, too young to hold a question in her heart that felt far too heavy for her small frame. And yet, she stood there, her gaze unwavering, her lips pressing together as she willed herself to speak. There had been many questions before hers. People had asked about the future, about dreams, about ideas that stretched the limits of what was possible. Some had been met with laughter, others with deep, thoughtful discussion. But this question, this one was different. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that betrayed her nerves. Then, in the quietest voice, she asked, "If you can send rockets to space, can you bring my daddy back?" For a moment, the world stopped moving. The crowd, which had been buzzing with murmurs and anticipation, fell into a stunned silence. It was as if no one could quite process what they had just heard. A question so simple, yet so devastating. The girl's mother let out a quiet breath, beside her, as if she had been holding it in, unsure of how the moment would unfold. The child's small fingers tightened their grip, her knuckles turning white as she waited for an answer. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, Some lowered their eyes, not wanting to intrude on the weight of the moment. Others stared in stunned disbelief, their expressions softening with realization. This wasn't a question about technology, about discovery, or about the future. It was a question about loss, about something far greater than machines or science. Her father had been an astronaut, a man who had reached for the stars, who had devoted his life to pushing the boundaries of what humanity could achieve. She had grown up hearing stories of his bravery, of his dreams, of the missions that took him farther than most people would ever go. But one day, he hadn't come back. She had been too young to understand at first. People had told her that he had gone on a journey, that he was among the stars now, that he had done something great. But as she grew older, she started to realize that those words were just a way to soften the truth. He wasn't coming home. No matter how many times she looked up at the sky, no matter how many nights she spent tracing the constellations he had taught her, he was gone. And yet, standing there, she still held onto a small sliver of hope. She had watched as people spoke about missions to Mars, about sending humans farther than ever before. She had listened to stories of innovation, of breakthroughs, of possibilities that once seemed like science fiction becoming reality. So she had to ask. Because if someone could send people beyond the Earth, if they could build machines that traveled through the stars, then maybe, just maybe, they could bring back the one person she missed more than anything in the world. The silence in the room stretched on, heavy with emotion. Some people blinked rapidly, their eyes glistening with unshed tears. Others pressed their lips together, swallowing the lump that had formed in their throats. And in the middle of it all, she stood there, waiting. The weight of the little girl's question lingered in the air, pressing down on everyone in the room. A question so simple, yet so impossibly heavy, filled with a kind of innocent hope that made even the most seasoned minds pause. The silence stretched on, an unspoken recognition that no one had expected a moment like this. Eyes turned toward the stage, searching for a response. Some looked away, unable to meet the raw vulnerability in the girl's gaze. Her mother, standing just behind her, reached out a hand as if to pull her back, as if second-guessing whether she should have let her ask at all. But the child stood, firm, waiting. The answer did not come quickly. There was no scripted response, no rehearsed lines to fall back on. Because how could anyone possibly find the right words for something like this? Slowly, a deep breath was taken, a step forward. The tension in the room did not ease, but the weight of the moment shifted just enough. Eyes locked onto hers, acknowledging the depth of what she had asked. Then, kneeling to her level, the response came, not in hurried words, but in a voice steady and filled with something unexpected. Sorrow. I wish I could. The words were soft, but carried a depth that made them feel almost tangible. They were not dismissive, not an attempt to move past the question quickly. They were real, honest. And in that honesty, they held something deeper than any promise could. The girl's small hands trembled at her sides, but she did not look away. She had spent so long imagining different answers, hoping for something, anything, that could make sense of the emptiness she felt. I can't bring him back, the voice continued, but I can promise you this. His journey wasn't for nothing. Her lower lip quivered, but she held back the tears threatening to spill. She had heard people say things like that before. Words about honor, about legacy, about how her father had been part of something bigger. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't just a phrase spoken to comfort her. It was a promise. You deserve to know that what he did mattered. That people like him, people who reach for the stars, change the world for the rest of us. And because of them, because of your father, we're working to make sure others who follow in his footsteps come home. A hush fell over the crowd. A single tear slipped down the girl's cheek, but she did not wipe it away. Her hands clenched into small fists, not in anger, but in the kind of determination that only those who have known loss understand. The person kneeling in front of her studied her face, searching for the right thing to say. Then, after a pause, the words came. Not rehearsed, not grand, but something meant just for her. "Would you like to see what we're building?" Her brows knit together, uncertainty flickering across her face. She nodded slowly, unsure of what that meant. "You can come visit. You can see where it all happens. And if you want, I'd love for you to be part of it. You and your mom. A tour, a chance to see everything up close. Because people like you, the ones who care, the ones who ask the big questions, you're the ones who make the future possible." A gasp rippled through the audience, a murmur of approval, a quiet sob from somewhere in the crowd. The girl looked up at her mother, uncertainty and hope warring in her eyes. Her mother, who had remained frozen in the weight of the moment, gave a small nod, her own eyes shining with emotion. The girl turned back, her lips pressing together as she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible smile. Not because the pain had disappeared, not because she suddenly had all the answers, but because, for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. And in that moment, something changed. The moment had shifted into something indescribable, something that neither the audience nor the little girl had expected. She had come with a question that had no easy answer, one that carried the weight of a lifetime of longing. And yet, what she had received was not dismissal, not an attempt to move past the discomfort, but something far more valuable. There was no miracle in the response she had been given, no magical words that could undo the loss she had endured. But in the eyes of those around her, something had changed. The people in the room, who had initially come for discussions about the future, for talks of science, technology, and exploration, now found themselves caught in a moment that was entirely human. A child standing before a room full of adults had unknowingly reminded them all of something they had forgotten. Behind every great leap forward, behind every daring ambition to touch the stars, there were lives, sacrifices, and people left behind. The girl's small hands remained clenched at her sides, but her fingers slowly relaxed, the tension in her body easing as she processed everything she had just heard. She had spent so long carrying this question, this ache that she couldn't put into words, and now, while the pain remained, there was something else. A flicker of understanding. The offer she had received was not something she had expected. The chance to see where it all happened, to step into the places where people worked every day to make sure others like her father would one day return safely. It was more than she could have imagined. Her mother gently placed a hand on her shoulder, as if grounding her in the reality of the moment. The girl glanced up, her eyes still shimmering with unshed tears, but there was something else there now, a hint of curiosity, of wonder, of something that had been buried beneath grief. People in the audience watched with bated breath as she took a step closer, her voice small but steady. "Really?" The answer was immediate. "Really?" A soft murmur spread through the crowd, a mixture of relief and admiration. Strangers who had never met her, who had no idea what she had been through, now found themselves caught up in the emotion of it all. Some wiped their eyes discreetly, others exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that they had just witnessed something profound. She nodded slowly, her mind racing with possibilities she hadn't considered before. For so long, space had felt like something that had only taken from her, something vast and untouchable, responsible for the hole in her heart that had never fully healed. But now, for the first time, it felt different. It felt like something she could reach for. She looked up again, her voice a little stronger this time. "Can I learn more?" A smile, a nod. "You can learn as much as you want." And with those words, the weight of the moment settled over everyone in the room. What had started as a heartbreaking question had turned into something else entirely. Not closure, because some wounds never truly close, but a new beginning. The little girl, who had once only looked at the stars with sorrow, was now seeing them in a different way. Not just as the place where her father had disappeared, but as something she could one day reach for herself. The weight of the moment lingered as the little girl stood there, her eyes reflecting a newfound understanding. The grief she carried would never fully disappear, but something within her had shifted. For the first time, she saw the stars not just as the place where she had lost someone, but as something she could one day reach herself. The audience remained silent, fully absorbed in what had just transpired. This was not the ending anyone had expected. What had started as a conversation about the future of space travel had turned into something far deeper, a reminder of the human side of exploration, of the sacrifices made, and of the people left behind. The little girl's fingers relaxed. At her sides, her small shoulders rising and falling with a steady breath.
She had not received the answer she had secretly wished for. No one could bring her father back, but she had received something just as meaningful. She had been given recognition. She had been seen, heard, and given hope for the future.
She turned to her mother. The woman gave her a reassuring nod, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. This moment would stay with them forever. It was more than just words. It was an invitation to be part of something greater, to channel grief into curiosity, and to find meaning in what had once been only loss. The murmurs in the room grew louder, people exchanging glances, whispering about what they had just witnessed. Some were visibly emotional, others contemplative. This was the kind of moment that would not be easily forgotten. The girl hesitated for a moment before whispering, "Thank you." And with that, the conversation that had begun with sorrow ended with something unexpected. Hope. Hope that the past did not have to define the future. Hope that loss could be turned into inspiration. And hope that the little girl who had once only dreamed of her father returning might one day step forward and continue the journey he had started. As she took her mother's hand and walked away from the stage, the audience erupted into applause, not just for the response she had received, but for the strength she had shown. A strength beyond her years, a strength that one day might take her farther than